And welcome back, listeners. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Invisible Threat Podcast. And as is normal, I am joined by my very esteemed co-host, Dr. Matthew Eby, coming in from warmish Kansas City. How you doing, bud?
It's kind of chilled out a little bit this week, but it's just an interim here. We're just very blessed that it's been very mild, so can't complain. It's just good. But thanks for welcoming me in so kindly all the time, Carter. I very much appreciate the intros, and you did such a great job here. It's like all of these podcasts with you in here, you are just really really a great co-host. So I just have to give a shout out to you that I haven't done so far, because you are really really good at this.
I'm honored that you would say something so kind. That obviously means a lot to me. You know, you and I, as the listeners, got a chance to hear some of the backstory about how we got connected on episode 1. If you haven't listened to that, listeners, make sure you go back and listen to episode 1, because it's important for the context and the backstory about how previously just Matt Eby, now Dr. Matt Eby, which is totally awesome. Thank you. Very, very kind for you to say. And, you know, it's interesting. I know we're in March now, time stamping this podcast. It's springtime-ish in Kansas City. And someone who moved out to Phoenix, Arizona almost 30 years ago from Kansas City, as we used to say back in the day, if you don't like the weather, just wait 15 minutes. And I know this time of year is as dicey as it gets.
It absolutely is. Yeah. And I think that pointing to the listeners to not, especially this particular episode, go back and listen to episode 2, because this is a reflection of an analysis of episode 2. So once you listen to this, you may want to go back and review that one, because we're going to talk a lot about episode 2 in this particular show.
Yeah, and I'm super excited about that. And for those who do remember episode 2, it'll be really intriguing as we dive a little bit deeper and we go back into that story. So, I mean, honestly, without further delay, I think it's timely, you know, since you brought it up, you know, today we're going to go back, right? Episode 2 felt tense. It felt tight, right? Not hostile, right? Not explosive, but tight, right? And we told listeners something early on in this series. Disagreement is data, right? So today we're going to ask a question we didn't really answer then. What was the data? What was actually happening during that time between us, Matt?
Well, whatever happened between us in episode 2 is exactly what happens inside fiduciary committee rooms on a regular basis. And that's what we were demonstrating.
And we didn't have language for it really at that time, as, you know, going back in time. So that's why it's really interesting on how we're going to sort of reframe this with that new updated language, right?
That's correct. We certainly did not have language at that time, but we felt it. And for the listeners that I know that watched episode 2, they certainly felt that tension in episode 2 as well.
What I love about that is that we talked about that. You know, I remember you calling me, we won't name any names or whatever, but you had shared some inside skinny, if you will, about other people that listened to that, unbeknownst to them, like what was happening. I loved some of the backstory that you shared with me and how people were feeling that tension from your inner circle.
Yeah, my sister especially, she got so involved with it that she couldn't even finish it. So she had to put it aside, that the tension was too much for her. But let's clear something up immediately. What happened between us at that point in time wasn't about ego, and it wasn't about insecurity. It wasn't about personality either. You and I really get along well. It was about orientation.
Yeah, but the question bears the question, orientation toward what?
Well, as we'll explain, different obligations, different things that both of us felt important to protect. And that is the connection to fiduciary duty as well. Let's replay it. When you said, I want this to feel like my podcast too, What were you protecting?
Well, one, ownership, right? My voice, my presence, right? I didn't want to just facilitate, right? I wanted to participate, to feel involved.
Yeah, and if you remember at the end of episode 1, you said to me that, yeah, maybe you could talk about yourself a little bit, and that was the prompt that started this, right? So
Yeah.
exactly. And then when I said in episode 2 that the material that we were discussing doesn't forgive casual handling, what was I protecting?
Yeah, and that's what I love that, and it was interesting how that prompted into episode 2, and again, unscripted, right? We didn't necessarily see that that was gonna happen, but, you're protecting structure, right? The work, your incredible research.
Exactly. So before we could talk about making changes and giving you more voice, two legitimate protections were active. You were guarding ownership, and I was guarding structure. Neither were wrong, but they were not the same things. That's the first clue. So let's draw something simple. Imagine a vertical line. At the top, let's put structure. And at the bottom, let's put identity. In fiduciary rooms, most disagreement lands somewhere between structure and identity. When people disagree, they're usually protecting something along that line. In episode 2, structure was important to me, as we just said, and your identity was important to you.
And, that sounds confrontational when you say it that way.
Well, I don't think so. Structure isn't better than identity, and identity isn't better than structure. They're both legitimate fiduciary pulls. I was leaning hard towards protecting our structure. You were leaning hard towards protecting your identity. That's tension, not failure.
But that wasn't the whole tension. There was something else happening.
Yeah, there was.
I said, right, let's be fair. I wanted a balanced voice, right? I wanted a shared presence, proportional airtime, if you will.
Yep, and that's another axis, a horizontal axis, with fairness on the left hand side. When I pushed back at that discussion, what was I worried about?
Well, flattening the theory, misinterpretation, which can happen very easily. And then, of course, reputational distortion.
Yeah, risk, exposure. So that's on the other side of that horizontal axis. Now look at it.
Yeah, structure to identity, right? These are on the same vertical axis.
That's right.
Fairness to risk, and these are on the horizontal axis.
And when you overlay those like we've done on our diagram, you get a compass. There's polarity here. We have north, south, east, and west.
Now, I don't know about for you, Matt, but having this like really spelled out and this being able to see this, and listeners, here's the thing. If you're just listening to this, make sure you go to our YouTube channel, watch this episode, because this is critically important to really highlight these axes that we're talking about: structure to identity, fairness to risk, right? That overlay. So anyway, Matt, I'll go ahead and I'll let you continue, but I just wanted to let the listeners know a lot of times podcast listeners are listening, but this is something that visually they kind of need to be able to see. So make sure that they needed to know to go to our YouTube channel to be able to view this.
Thanks, Carter. That's a great suggestion. And as far as north is concerned, let's change the word structure to anchors. Because in fiduciary terms, we're talking about usually the governing instrument, policy, procedure. So anchors is a better word there, I think. But structure is part of that.
All right. So on the south is identity, ownership, and role, right? I was trying to protect that role. I'm trying to protect. While on the west is fairness, the proportionality I was really looking for.
That's exactly correct. And on the east is the risk, the exposure I wanted to defend.
So, what was actually happening in episode 2? Right? I was in the southwest quadrant, right? Identity plus fairness were dominant for me.
Yeah. So let's put your name, Carter, in the southwest quadrant so we can see that visual as well. And I was in the northeast quadrant with anchors and risk dominant for me. We were positioned on opposing diagonals. So we should see the diagonal line
Yep.
between those two.
Yeah, that's why it didn't feel like a debate. To me, it felt like pressure. Right? Pressure, not an argument, just pressure.
Exactly. Had we been on opposite sides of one axis, it would feel like an argument. But on opposing diagonals, it simply feels like tension. Because both of us were right just about different things.
And as is pretty normal, when two legitimate obligations, right, they pool at the same time, tension is not dysfunctional. It's just that information that's necessary.
Exactly correct. Now, here's the part that should make every fiduciary lean forward. That exact feeling right there is what happens in discretionary committee rooms all of the time. No one is yelling. No one is unethical. Nobody's incompetent. But different discretionary obligations are pulling in different directions. One of the members might be protecting the instrument, the governing document. Another, protecting the fairness, the treatment of the family. Another is thinking about exposure underneath an examination in the future. And maybe someone else is thinking about what this says about the identity of the institution.
And just like we experienced, they're not wrong. They're just oriented differently.
Yes. But here's where it gets serious. If that orientation stays invisible, the dominant pull wins. Not the best reasoning, not the clearest loyalty, the loudest pressure, the dominant pull. And pressure rarely announces itself as pressure. And that's how fiduciary judgment quietly narrows, not through misconduct, not through bad faith, through imbalance, through sequence, through one obligation going first without anyone noticing.
So, what happened in episode 2 wasn't just podcast tension, it was a live demonstration of how fiduciary judgment forms.
And if you've ever sat in a room where something felt tight, but no one could name why, you felt that diagonal pull.
Yeah. And that's very crystallized for me now, right? Like it's crystal clear and I can see that now.
So let's make this concrete. On anchors, I was probably a 5. On risk, I was probably a 5.
Okay. Well, on both fairness and identity, I was probably a 5.
So when intensity is high on opposite diagonals,
Yeah, the system tightens, right? Not because someone's wrong, right? Because intensity is high.
now imagine that inside a trust committee, the one we just discussed. High risk, high anchors. What gets compressed?
Well, fairness and identity.
And nobody announces that compression. It just happens. That's how fiduciary judgment narrows.
Matt, something else mattered in episode 2, right? It didn't escalate into a fight between us.
Emotion, which is highlighted in the center here, regulated our space. Here's what happened. Intentionally, neither of us got defensive. Neither of us weaponized risk, and neither of us dismissed either of our identities.
Yeah, we both said, agree to disagree, right? Neither of us is wrong.
That's emotional integration. However, if emotion spikes, anchors plus risk results in rigidity, not seeing the other side. Identity and fairness results in resentment, making the other side evil.
Yeah.
Emotion didn't spike, so the system held.
Yep.
That demonstrates maturity.
Okay, well, so now can you bring this home for our listeners? Why does this matter to fiduciary leaders?
Because this is exactly what happens every time discretion is exercised. Disagreement doesn't begin because duty is unclear. It begins because more than one responsible way of honoring that duty makes sense. That's discretion. The document is clear, the obligation is clear, but more than one answer still makes sense. That's where disagreement starts. And inside that moment, all of the dimensions activate: anchors, fairness, identity, and risk. Then emotion, the center that we've been discussing, starts compressing time. If those dimensions or those orientations are invisible, the strongest dimension wins. And if anchors dominate, as we said, rigidity wins. If fairness dominate, context overrides consistency. If identity wins, it becomes personal. If risk dominates, defensibility comes first.
So healthy, right, fiduciary systems don't eliminate disagreement.
That's exactly what we said from the beginning.
Yeah.
They surface orientation. They choose deliberately. And that's what good looks like.
Yeah, the part that matters most is that the invisible threat, as we call this podcast, was never disagreement, right?
That's exactly correct. It's an unrecognized shift in orientation. If we hadn't named what we were protecting in episode 2,
Yeah, I could look like I was attention seeking.
and I could look like I was protecting my ego.
Yeah, and that could have fractured our partnership. But instead,
Orientation became visible, judgment replaced reaction, and that's the difference. The compass does not conclude for us. It makes the orientation of our views visible. And once orientation is visible, judgment becomes deliberate, not reflexive or overreactive.
what was episode 2 really, if it in your estimate?
It was judgment before resolution. As we said, all 5 dimensions were active before anything was concluded. That's rare. Most professionals collapse to one dimension. Structure hardens, fairness bends consistency, identity takes it personally, and risk protects first.
Well, we didn't collapse, right? We didn't slow down. We named what we were both protecting.
And once named, we could make mature judgment. That's fiduciary craftsmanship.
Yeah, I like that. Fiduciary craftsmanship. It's so perfectly put. Disagreement, also isn't danger.
Invisible orientation is danger. That's the invisible threat, as you just said. Disagreement is data.
Most people rush to resolution. We don't. Listeners, thank you again so much for joining us for another episode of The Invisible Threat. And we really, really do appreciate everybody coming on, listening, and or watching. As we did mention in this episode, you really need to see the visual of what we are conveying to the audience today. Make sure you go to our YouTube channel, like, share, and subscribe wherever you do get your podcasts. And, Spotify, Podbean, wherever you get your podcast, typically Apple Podcasts. And, the amount of information that is showed on this show, really, I get so much out of it. And I know that our listeners are as well. So for my esteemed co-host, Dr. Matt Eby, I'm Carter Wilcoxson, Epic Services Company CEO and founder. Thanking you for joining us again for another phenomenal episode. Matt, thank you. That was so awesome. And I really do appreciate all that information that you're able to pull out and share with all of our listeners.
Well, Carter, as my esteemed mentor, Dr. Ellie Goldratt, the late Dr. Ellie Goldratt said, no one owns knowledge, and I'm honored to share this with everybody who listens to us, and hopefully that they can apply it and use it to their benefit and to the benefit of their clients and beneficiaries of trust, etc. So all the best, and we'll continue on with this and sharing it with the world.
Awesome. Well, until next time, listeners, we will see you on the Invisible Threat Podcast. Thank you, everybody.